Our first stop is downtown to visit our fellow colleague and someone we all know and love, Kenneth King. Kenneth, thanks so much for letting us into your studio. I think this is really exciting, and I know that our ASDP members are going to enjoy getting to see how you work and getting to learn a little bit more about you.
Well, thank you.
You had a big transition in the last couple of years, moving from San Francisco into New York. Did you have to redevelop your client base when you got here?
Well, it was a challenge. I just made the decision to move in 2000, and so the challenge was, how do I keep the cash flow going from 2000? How do I get the cash flow to go from there to here? And so what I did in 2003 was to share an apartment here and get my feet on the ground and kind of figure out where things were and meet some people and that sort of thing. Then I was able to make the leap in 2004. So yeah, it's actually been, a lot of my clients from the Bay Area and around the country still come here, but it's been a challenge still to build a clientele here in New York City.
Interesting. And I noticed too from pieces that you've written, things on your website, that you like structure, and you were very much inspired by the Beaux-Arts architecture in San Francisco. How do you find inspiration here in New York? What in the New York lifestyle and architecture brings you new ideas?
Well, it's not only the architecture, it's the whole thing that people dress, especially in the fall. The fall is like a fashion show here. When the first cold snap comes, everyone gets out their new clothes and dresses. And also in New York, everyone walks, so you get to see up close what people are wearing. You get to see the detail, the width of a lapel, where the buttons are placed, that sort of thing. And there is also an abundance of architecture from the Beaux-Arts period and actually before. So I feel like it sort of added influences that I didn't have in San Francisco.
That's neat. When you look back, what was it in your life that made you decide to be a clothing designer?
Well, let's see, I started sewing for Barbie when I was 4. My Barbie was 27. She had a convertible. She lived in a big city. She went to good restaurants and the theater and the opera, which my parents were kind of concerned about because they didn't quite know what to make of me. But what made me decide to be a designer was I had a boss. I worked in window display. I had a boss in California who was certifiably crazy, and we had a chance to kill him and make it look like an accident, and we almost did. So I realized that I needed to work for myself because I just didn't have patience working for other people.
What's your favorite part of the design process?
Oh, wow. The favorite part actually is the engineering. For me, my entire aesthetic is really based on the craft and figuring out a technique or a process, and then figuring out, okay, this is really interesting, but how can I then actually turn it into something that's a garment? That is the most satisfying part for me.
Well, when you talk about the technique and the structure that you like to develop, obviously a big part would be then working with the client to create the structure that fits their particular body. Do you have any words of wisdom about working with a client or choosing a client that makes that process more interesting and more fun for you?
Well, the first thing I do when I look for a client, there are 2 things I look for. One, they may not flinch about the price, because if they do, it'll be like swimming with a locomotive strapped to your back. The second thing is they have to have very strong likes and dislikes because they're easy to please. Early on, I made the big mistake of having someone say, "Oh, you surprised me." And then I was the one with the big surprise when she said, "What the hell is this?" So with my particular work, a very wise man said years and years ago when I started, you'll never have to sell your work. People will either get it or they won't. And so those are the 2 things that make the entire transaction flow smoothly, because the people who really get my work understand this is a process. There are going to be fittings. It's going to take a little while. It's going to cost some money, but at the end you're going to get something that you can't get anywhere else.
That's neat. Do you have something new that you've been working on that you might want to show our
Well,
ASDP
my most recent thing, because I sew for other people all the time, I actually got to make things for myself, and I'm so pleased. They're almost done. Are these vulgar or what? I just so love these. What I love about these is that this is Fortuny fabric. And for those who aren't really familiar with Fortuny, Mariano Fortuny fabric is ruinously expensive. This is probably $500–600 a yard. And I got it through a chain of circumstances for nothing. And so I figured, you know, I want a shirt and a pair of pants out of this. And I'm not going to, of course, wear them together, but I just like the idea of making a pair of jeans out of this just fabulously expensive fabric. So this is actually what I'm working on right now. But what I have been working on is sort of a segue. I have three lines of inquiry. I have what's called the souffle, I have what's called the leafing, and then I have what's called the cut work. And actually, on the 25th anniversary cover of Threads magazine, my piece, one of the cut work pieces, I'm very pleased. So
that Fortuny fabric is silk screened, I assume?
You know, it's block printed by hand.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's ruinously expensive. But what I'm going to be showing you now is what I'm actually working on for customers, which is sort of a merging between the cut work and the leafing, which I do. I have what I call three lines of inquiry, because I don't really do a collection every season. I have a particular aesthetic that I hew towards, and I make different pieces. And it started as the whole piece started as this big piece of Mongolian lamb that I found, and it was a 23 by 46 inch rectangle. And the challenge from a pattern making standpoint was to get a Bolero jacket out of that. And then from there, it kind of morphed into this thing where the leafing and the cut work sort of merged.
The leafing and the cut work would, I think, be of great interest to our members. Can we see?
Oh, absolutely. Now this is the Bolero jacket I was talking about. This is goat hair, actually. And it was a 23 by 46 inch rectangle that I found, and I really, really love the fur because it has these really lovely colors on the undercoat with the strawberry blonde and the black tips. This is all done after, you know, the goat didn't actually grow this color. So the challenge on this, since it was a 23 by 46 inch rectangle, was to actually get a Bolero jacket out of this limited piece of fabric. So from a pattern making standpoint, I do rule. I was able to do it with just one little gusset under the arm. And from a fur construction standpoint, on a long-haired fur, you generally have leather under the arm anyway. So with this really, really beautiful fur, which in my mind is barbaric while being elegant, I wanted the lining to be just as spectacular or more spectacular. So this is where the cut work and the leafing merged. So there is the lining.
That's gorgeous.
And so now the process to get the lining. The process was, this is the sample, because I always like to make a sample. The sample is actually 5 layers of fabric. It is, the base layer is purple taffeta, which is this layer here. And then the leafing came in because I wanted to make leaf fabric as more of a texture. Then what are the branches actually, because the inspiration for this was snow on the trees in Union Square in the winter. All of that was cut out of this, and I'll show you the pattern in a minute. And then there was embroidery and Swarovski crystals put in, and then finally a layer of really fine polyester organza went over that with more embroidery. So it's really kind of a sandwich. And you can see here, this line here is actually the underarm scene. So the object of the game was to pivot all of the construction seams into decorative details. Then, let's see, we'll move this one here. And since I thought it was kind of a shame to have it on the inside, I decided to do a different treatment of the same motif on the outside. So I made this little bolero. And you can see here, the green taffeta is the foundation layer. And then you can see all of the black here. That is actually cut. That's the cut work. And this actually is the pattern for this. And I figure your viewers may appreciate this. As you can see, it's rather complex. This is the little Bolero jacket. It sort of looks like a topographical map. Here we have center back, There's center front. Here's center front. So let's see, the armhole seam is from here around to here to there. Side seam is from here, joins to here. And on the other side, it's a little different variation of the same thing. So the shaded areas in the pattern here are actually the black fabric. So what we're doing is we're cutting away all of the negative space and then essentially creating a textile that is the shape of the finished garment. Nifty, huh? So yeah, it was quite a challenge, but what I really like is the cutwork pieces, the cutwork and the leafing got to merge in this. And if you look on the inside, you can see those are the structural seams. So this is actually kind of where I'm going right now aesthetically, is I'm exploring this particular kind of thing. I really like where it's going.
Well, these are really lovely pieces, Kenneth, and I have one closing question for you, because I know on your website you talk about wanting the woman to be beautiful, wanting your clients to look the best they can. Mm-hmm. And really recently, Michael Volbracht made the comment that he felt that the fashion industry today was misogynist. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think misogynist is a little bit strong, but I think he's got a point, because what they're saying in fashion is that you have to look a certain way, you have to be a size 2, you have to, there's a certain thing they're trying to force people into. And one of the things I want to do with my customers is I want them to look lovely. And that seems like a very old-fashioned concept, but I think that's what a lot of people want to do. They want to look well in their clothes. They want to look lovely if they're a woman. They want to look good if they're a guy. And so everyone has that one thing that looks good on them. Like, for example, one of my customers, she's in her 70s, but she has a really, really beautiful back and nape of the neck. It's just beautiful. So for her, I cut things with a high collar in front and low in back. So, I have another customer who she's really, really beautiful up here and she has great legs. And so those are the things I showcase, because if you find that one thing on the person that looks beautiful and you emphasize that, then what you're doing is you're respecting that person and not trying to force them into someone else's idea of what they think is beautiful.
I think that's a great philosophy for all of our ASDP members to take with them today. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.